So last time we talked about why this commander was bad, so this time we're gonna talk about why this commander is good. Okay, so to some, Caesar's the stuff of dreams, and then to others, he's the stuff of nightmares. Here's why. His groove allows exhaust units around Caesar to be refreshed and be able to act again. Now this can work on buildings and units that were just recently purchased on the same turn. This feature is not used too much, but it's still good to know. Now that we know what he does, we can see why it's so strong. Now Caesar's groove is medium charged, so that means that he could get it fairly easily early on to the game, and then use it later on to the game earlier. So which means that it is likely that it could be used 2 or more times. So normally when you play War Groove, both players don't want to be in range of the opponent's units. So in this example, Blue has done a good job of keeping his units away from Caesar's units. But one of the good things about Caesar is that he could just completely ignore that, because he could reposition his unit and then groove his units so that they have a better starting point. Even though Caesar can only groove up to 4 units, those units will be coming from safety and probably wipe out the opponent's army when Caesar grooves. Now in the past, when armies fought, they would usually just line up in a large line, and that no one would get in the middle because they'll be killed instantly. So same thing in War Groove. Both players control a certain amount of space. If you try to move in, chances are your units will be blown up. But with Caesar's groove, you could just completely ignore that. Your units can get right in the opponent's faces and just blow them up instead. This one's the most intuitive. Your units can attack again, so they could attack, get grooved, and attack. Now in this example, Caesar moved in without the groove, and you can see how Blue can respond really easily because the attack wasn't so great. He could only attack only a small portion of the army at once, and then he got punished for it. We can look at the same example, but this time Caesar will use his groove after his unit's attack, and look at the difference that it makes. Before, he just attacks only a few units of Blue's army, but now this time he just completely wipes it. Another strong thing about Caesar is that he doesn't have to go for the HQ or the commander only. He could go for many different targets. And if those targets don't exist, like no bears to contest or no key units to kill, he could just hold groove for the enemy commander or the HQ. With that being said, we could piece everything together and see how we could play it. So your range of your Caesar groove is mainly determined by where Caesar actually is, because that's where you cast your groove. Now your range can vary from place to place depending on where Caesar is. So in this example, this square would be a good place to groove. These squares are where your units are going to go. So if you look at the actual example, the dragon can attack twice because of where Caesar is. Now if Caesar were further back in the map, then this attack wouldn't happen, and I would be forced out of the center and lose advantage like that. Once you have groove, you have to notice where Caesar is and where he could groove. This match was commentated, so you could check that out. Link is in the description, and in there I explained what my reasoning is and how I played the game. It was a good match, so do check it out. So for this example specifically, I was trying to get a spirit crit on the mage so that my dragon could be uncontested and force the opponent out of the center. And if you have a hard time thinking about that, then just take a look at this.
Situation as before. This time he rises. Offensive rebound in the crowd. Oh, slam dunk on the alley-oop.
Yeah, this is basically Caesar. There's two parts to this. One is the movement of the units, and then the second part is how strong the unit actually is. So these are some common units that can maximize Caesar's groove when you use it. So these units are either fast or strong or both. And sometimes you can only get knights and alchemists out, which is already good enough because those things can beat a lot of stuff down. There are always key units in the game. So the enemy commander and the enemy headquarters, that's pretty obvious because that's how you win the game. But sometimes you might go for the barracks instead, or a key unit in the opponent's composition, like a trebuchet or a dragon. So those things you have to keep in mind because you have to focus on the things that will give you the most benefit. So in this case, going for the units are fine, but if you could win the game by bringing down the headquarters, why wouldn't you? So you have to be focused and not be distracted on some things that might seem good, but pass up on something that's better, like a commander lethal. And sometimes you won't have proper targets, so you don't always have to use your groove whenever you get it. You could save your groove, pressure your opponent, and get value from that. Because your opponent will have to retreat further back, or else the Caesar groove will completely destroy them. This one's fairly easy to understand, since the more units you have around Caesar, the more options you have for the groove. One thing you have to remember is that you could push your units up in a safe spot and threaten things next turn with your groove. Your opponent wouldn't be able to do anything because your units are in a safe spot. So your opponent has to either retreat or lose things on purpose just to defend like the HQ or the barracks or something else. So you can force your opponent's hand by moving forward in a safe spot, even though your opponent can see it coming. I have to admit, it's a nightmare playing against Caesar. So the best way to get used to it is play as Caesar or play against Caesar. This way you know what his strengths are and you know what the weaknesses are as Caesar yourself. Caesar is entirely dependent on what unit he has around him. So if he only has weak units on one side with him and strong units on the other side, his groove would not be that scary. So one thing you could do is pick off his units while he's separated from his strong units. Caesar can't be everywhere at once. So when Caesar is in one place, he is not in another place. So you could abuse that by pushing forward in the place he's not in, and then steamroll your advantage from there and push against Caesar. Because he's not invincible, so once you have enough units, you could still beat Caesar like that. His groove impact is pretty high for medium, so I would just bring it down to slow to match the other commanders that have slow charge and have the same impact as Caesar. A lot of tier lists place Caesar in the top 4 or close to the top 4, but that doesn't mean that he is easy to play or easy to win as him, so you still have to practice and know what he is strong at and what he's weak at. Eventually, you could turn this into this. So comment below on your thoughts about Caesar and how he could be improved or even nerfed a little bit. I do read all the comments and I appreciate everyone who actually comments. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.